The first time I heard the voices, the corn hadn't even reached my knees. I remember that morning like a scar, how the fog hung low across the field, pale and ghostly, and the way the sun struggled to rise through it. Our family farm sat on the edge of Hollow Creek, a forgotten patch of land where the roads turned to dust, and the nights came early. It was 1948, and even back then, it felt like the world had moved on without us. Folks in town said our soil was blessed, rich, dark, and good for growing. But it never felt blessed to me. It felt like something alive, something waiting. My father used to say that the earth remembers everything that's buried in it. He'd say it while he plowed, his hands tight on the handle of the tractor, eyes fixed on the rows of dirt turning over in front of him. "Don't ever dig where the ground sinks," he told me once, not looking up. "It's better not to wake what's underneath." I didn't ask what he meant. You don't question your father when he says something like that. You just nod and pretend you understand. But even then, the way his voice dropped when he said it, it stayed with me. That summer felt off from the start. The air was too still, the sky too pale, like everything had been drained of color. The cicadas didn't sing the way they used to, and the cows in the pasture would stand frozen for hours, their heads all turned in the same direction, staring toward the field. By late July, the corn had grown tall enough to block the horizon. When the wind moved through, it whispered. It really sounded like whispering, like a crowd murmuring just out of sight. My mother had started acting strange around that time. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her eyes glassy, her skin damp with sweat. "Do you hear them?" she'd ask, her voice shaking. "They're talking again." My father would tell her it was just the wind, or maybe the coyotes down by the creek, but I could tell he didn't believe it either. He'd get out of bed after she fell back asleep, walk to the window, and just stand there for hours, staring out toward the field. The next morning, when I went out to feed the chickens, I heard it too, faint, like a hum under the soil. I froze, thinking maybe it was just the tractor running in the distance. But there was no one out there. The sound wasn't coming from the air, it was coming from below. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the ground. The dirt was cool and damp, and for a moment, all I could hear was the thump of my own heartbeat. Then, something else, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. Soft, slow. It sounded like someone talking through a mouthful of earth. I jerked back so fast, I scraped my palms on the dirt. I ran straight to the house. My father was sitting at the kitchen table with a cigarette between his fingers. He looked up when I came in, and I must have looked pale because his expression changed. "What did you hear?" he asked quietly. I didn't know how to answer. I just shook my head and said it was nothing. He didn't press me. He just took one last drag from his cigarette, crushed it out, and said, "Stay out of the fields until I tell you otherwise." That night, I heard him go outside long after midnight. I watched from my window as the glow of his lantern bobbed through the corn. He walked to the far end of the field, to where the ground dipped near the fence line. He stopped there and stood still for a long time, the lantern light trembling in his hand. Then he began to dig. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. It felt wrong, like if I spoke, something would hear me that wasn't him. I don't know how long I watched him, but when he finally came back inside, dawn was breaking and his clothes were soaked through with mud. He didn't eat breakfast. He didn't say a word, just washed his hands and stared out the window. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. "Don't go near that hole," he said finally, without looking at me. By midday, he was back in the barn, pretending to fix the old plow. I couldn't stop thinking about that spot in the field. The way he'd been digging, the way the ground had dipped there, even before he touched it. Something about it pulled at me, like a splinter under the skin. When the sun started to set, I snuck out the back door. The field smelled thick, sweet from the corn, but also something else. Something metallic, like rust. The air was heavy and hot, pressing against my skin. I walked carefully, counting the rows the way my father had taught me, until I reached the edge where the ground sank. There it was, a small hole, barely wider than a barrel lid. The soil around it looked freshly turned, darker than the rest. I crouched down, half expecting to hear that whisper again, but this time there was only silence. I picked up a handful of dirt. It felt warm, almost too warm, like something breathing just below. I dropped it quickly and backed away. My chest felt tight. The sun was gone now, and the light was dimming fast. I turned to go, but as I did, I thought I heard it again. A single word, faint, buried deep beneath me. I couldn't make it out, but I knew it was my name. I ran. I didn't look back until I was on the porch, gasping for breath. The field was dark, nothing but a wall of shadow. But just before I went inside, I saw something move between the rows. Something tall, black against the dim sky, standing perfectly still. That night, my mother didn't come down for supper. My father sat at the table, staring at his hands, the lantern light flickering across his face. I wanted to tell him what I'd seen, what I'd heard, but the words wouldn't come out. Finally, he said it for me. "You heard them, didn't you?" I nodded. He closed his eyes, let out a long, tired breath, and whispered, "Then it's already too late." He got up from the table, walked to the door, and locked it from the inside. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed through the quiet house. He turned back to me, and for the first time in my life, my father looked afraid. Outside, the corn rustled even though there was no wind, and somewhere beneath it, the voices started to hum again, soft, low, patient, like they knew I was listening. The day my father went to town for feed, the house felt too quiet. My mother was still in bed, eyes open but staring at nothing, her lips moving in tiny, soundless words. I brought her water, but she didn't drink. Her hands trembled, as if she was cold, though sweat glistened on her skin. I wanted to tell her I'd go with my father, that maybe the noise of the truck and the open road would clear my head. But when I mentioned it, she turned to me so suddenly it made me flinch. "Don't go near the field," she whispered. "Don't listen if they call." Before I could ask what she meant, she shut her eyes again. I stood there for a long time, the silence pressing in on me. Outside, the sunlight had a strange tint to it, too gold, too thick, like it had weight. When my father's truck disappeared down the road, I waited a few minutes, then grabbed the old spade from behind the barn. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that what I'd seen, what I'd heard, wasn't real. But deep down, I knew it was curiosity that pulled me out there. Curiosity stronger than fear. The heat was brutal, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the soil. Every step I took through the corn made a soft crunch, the stalks closing behind me like a curtain. By the time I reached the far end of the field, my shirt was sticking to my back, and my pulse thudded in my ears. The ground dipped ahead, just like before, but now it looked deeper, wider. The dirt was loose, dark, freshly turned. I knelt, brushed the soil away with the edge of my spade. At first, I thought it was a piece of rotted wood. Then the shape became clearer. A corner, sanded smooth, nails rusted to black. I brushed faster, my breath catching. It was a box, small, about 3 feet long. The realization hit me so hard, I almost dropped the spade. It wasn't just some random crate or part of a fence post. It was a coffin. My skin crawled. I sat back on my heels, staring at it. The air around me felt suddenly cold. Even though the sun was blazing overhead, I should have run right then, but something kept me there. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the faint sound I thought I heard coming from inside it. It wasn't loud, just a soft, steady hum. I leaned closer, the taste of dirt thick in my mouth. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. And then it happened. A voice, clear as day. It said my name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken. Like a breath right beneath the soil. My whole body locked up. The sound came again, a little louder, like it was moving toward the surface. I dropped the spade, stumbled to my feet, and ran so hard I nearly fell twice before reaching the yard. By the time I slammed the screen door shut behind me, my lungs burned and my hands were shaking. That night, I told my father everything. I told him about the box, about the voice, about how it said my name. I expected him to laugh, to call me out for sneaking where I shouldn't have been. But he didn't. He went completely still, his jaw tightening, his eyes fixed on the floor. When I finished, he stood up without a word, walked to the hallway, and came back with his coat. "Pack your things," he said. I just stared at him. "What? Why?" "We're leaving. Tonight." I wanted to argue, but one look at him, at his pale, drawn face, was enough. Something in him had broken. We left before sunrise. My mother didn't come. I asked where she was, and he said only, "She's resting." "Don't look back." Halfway down the dirt road, the truck began to cough and stutter. My father cursed under his breath and tried the ignition again and again, but the engine just groaned and died. We sat there in silence, the cornfield stretching endlessly behind us. He finally opened the door and stepped out. "Stay in the truck," he said. "I'll walk back and bring the tractor." Then he was gone, his figure shrinking into the distance, until the heat shimmer swallowed him. At first, I waited like he said, but as the minutes turned to hours, the world began to change around me. The air thickened, the insects stopped chirping, even the birds went silent. That's when I felt it, a vibration under my feet. At first, it was so faint I thought it was my imagination. Then it grew stronger. The truck rattled slightly, and I realized it wasn't the engine. It was the ground. The soil beneath me was humming. The corn started moving, not just swaying, but bending, rippling like a wave. The sound rose, a low throbbing hum that wasn't coming from any one direction. It was coming from everywhere, and within that hum, I heard voices, dozens of them, hundreds, layered and whispering, like people talking through walls. The words blurred together, but I could pick out a few. Please, cries, names I didn't know. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside me, vibrating in my chest, my skull, my teeth. I stumbled out of the truck, desperate for air, but the ground felt soft, almost liquid. My boots sank into it, as though the earth itself was breathing. I tried to run, but the soil gripped me like quicksand. Something brushed against my ankle. It was cold, wet, alive. I screamed and kicked, but another touch came, this time on my wrist, like a hand closing gently around it. I could feel the pressure of fingers, the smoothness of skin, slick with mud. I yanked free and fell backward, landing hard. The voices grew louder, a chorus of whispers rising from beneath the surface. The air pulsed with it. My eyes watered from the vibration, and I could barely hear myself screaming. Then, through the blur of noise and movement, I saw him, my father. He stood at the far edge of the corn, his lantern glowing faintly through the haze. Relief shot through me, and I started toward him, until I realized something was wrong. His light flickered against the rows, casting his shadow across the dirt. Only, the shadow wasn't following him. It stretched in the opposite direction, longer and longer, until it reached the truck. And when he lifted the lantern higher, the shadow didn't move. It stayed still. Then, slowly, the shadow turned its head toward me. I froze. My voice caught in my throat. I couldn't even breathe. My father, if that's what it was, lifted a hand as if to wave. But the shadow's arm didn't match his. It was slower, twisting at an angle that made my stomach turn. The humming stopped all at once. The silence was worse. For a few seconds, everything felt suspended. The air, the sound, my heartbeat. Then the corn behind me rustled, once, sharply. I turned, and something moved between the rows. Not running, not crawling, just gliding, smooth as smoke. When I looked back, my father was gone. The lantern light blinked out. Morning came grey and heavy, with a sky that looked like bruised steel. I was still in the truck, slumped against the seat, my mouth dry and my head pounding. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to remember where I was. Then it came back all at once. The field, the voices, the thing that looked like my father. The air smelled like wet soil and iron. I opened the door slowly and stepped out, my boots sinking into the mud. Everything looked the same, but quieter, flatter somehow. The cornfield stood still in the windless morning, and the road stretched empty in both directions. My father was nowhere in sight. The truck wouldn't start. I tried 3 times before giving up, resting my forehead on the steering wheel. The silence outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. I didn't want to go back toward the field, but there was nowhere else to go. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the town another 10 beyond that, so I walked. The mud sucked at my heels with every step, and the fog rolled in from the lowlands, thick enough to taste. I followed the fence line, keeping my eyes straight ahead, though part of me expected to see shapes moving between the stalks. Every now and then, I thought I heard a whisper, but it was faint, distant, like a memory that hadn't faded properly. Halfway down the road, I saw the lantern. It was sitting on the fence post, still burning, the glass cracked. Soot smeared along the rim. My stomach turned over. I reached for it, my hand trembling, and the metal was warm, too warm, as if it had just been held. There were footprints nearby, sunk deep into the mud, bare feet. I followed them before I could stop myself. They led off the road, down a small slope where the fog thickened into a pale wall. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became, until even my own breathing sounded foreign. The prints stopped at the edge of the field. The earth there had changed. It wasn't dirt anymore. It was soft, porous, like something that had been dug up and then filled back in. The smell hit me next, sour and sweet at the same time, the way fruit smells when it's been left to rot in the sun. Then I saw the box again. The coffin was sitting halfway above ground now, the soil pushed back, like something had clawed its way out. The lid hung open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body screamed to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I stepped closer instead. The hum started again, low, steady, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the lantern steady. Something inside the box moved. I froze, breath caught in my throat. A shadow shifted against the wood, followed by a sound, a dry scrape, like fingernails dragging along the inside. Then, slowly, a hand reached up over the edge. It wasn't a corpse's hand. It was clean, almost new, the skin pale and unblemished. The fingers flexed as if testing the air. The lantern light caught on a thin gold band around the wrist. My mother's bracelet. The thing that followed that hand wasn't her. It was smaller, thinner, its movements too deliberate. I stumbled back, but it sat up slowly, its head tilting toward me. The darkness inside the coffin, pooling around it like ink. I couldn't see its face, only the outline of hair matted with soil. The faint shape of a mouth that didn't quite close right. Then it spoke. "Where's your father?" The voice was hers, my mother's voice, but the sound was wrong, hollow, echoing as though it came from a deep pit. My chest locked tight. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It stood, one slow motion at a time, until it towered above the coffin's rim. The way it moved reminded me of marionettes, jerky, uncertain, like it was learning to be human. "Where's your father?" It asked again. I turned and ran. I don't remember how long I ran, only that the field stretched endlessly. The corn blurred by, the same rows repeating again and again, until I wasn't sure if I was moving at all. I tripped once and went down hard, the lantern smashing beside me, glass scattering into the dirt. When I looked up, I realized I was standing back where I started, at the fence line near the road. The box was gone. The ground was smooth again, no trace of the hole, no prints, no coffin, nothing. But the humming was still there, not under the ground this time, inside the air itself. It rose and fell like breathing. The corn bent gently, though there was no wind. The light dimmed, and for a moment I thought clouds had passed over the sun. But the sky hadn't changed. The dimness was coming from the field. The stalks began to move, rippling from one end to the other, as though something massive was passing beneath them. The sound of whispering came next. Hundreds of voices layered together, growing louder, closer. I stumbled back to the road, and that's when I saw him. My father was standing just beyond the fog. His clothes were torn, his eyes wide and glassy, his skin streaked with mud. He was moving slowly, dragging one leg behind him. When he saw me, he reached out a hand, but he didn't say anything. I ran to him anyway. He caught me in his arms, but his grip was cold, so cold it burned. His breath smelled like wet dirt. I tried to pull back, to look at his face, but he held me tighter. They're hungry, he whispered against my ear. We can't leave them. I fought harder, my heart hammering. His voice changed, deeper, layered, as if more than one person was speaking at once. We can't leave them, it said again, the words echoing through my skull. When I tore free and looked up, his eyes were gone. Just dark holes, empty and wet. His mouth opened too wide, and from it came that same low hum, vibrating through my bones. The ground split beneath us. A fissure ran through the road, the mud trembling as the voices surged out, screaming now, crying in thousands of overlapping tones. The cornfield writhed, every stalk bending inward toward the opening. I fell to my knees, hands pressed against my ears. But the sound was everywhere, inside, outside, beneath me, above me. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the world had gone still again. The road was whole. The corn stood straight. My father was gone. I don't remember walking home. I remember the house though. Quiet, empty, the windows open, curtains fluttering in the still air. My mother's bed was made. The floors were clean. Everything smelled faintly of soil. For days, I waited for them to come back. I stopped counting after a while. I didn't leave the house. I didn't eat. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the field, listening for that sound. And then one night, I heard it again. The hum, faint but clear, rising from the earth like a heartbeat. I went outside barefoot, the ground cold against my feet. The field looked peaceful under the moonlight, the corn swaying gently. I stood at the edge, breathing in the damp, heavy air. The sound grew louder, and I could feel it now. Not just hear it, but feel it, in my chest, in my throat, behind my eyes. Something was calling me, and this time, I didn't run. I walked between the rows, the stalks brushing my shoulders, whispering as I passed. The earth beneath me throbbed softly, welcoming. I reached the place where the box had been, and knelt down. The soil pulsed once, warm under my palms. A voice rose from below, calm, familiar. Come home. I smiled. I didn't know why, but it felt right. The hum deepened, wrapping around me like a blanket. The ground shifted slightly, softening. When the soil opened beneath me, I didn't fight it. The earth took me gently, slowly, the air thickening with whispers. The corn above swayed one last time before going still. Now if you stand by that field on a quiet night, you might hear it too. The hum beneath the dirt, steady as breath. If you listen long enough, you'll hear the voices. They'll sound like family.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.